afterward. During the session itself, you can use the chat to share some questions. Good morning to everyone. I can see some of the message jumping in. So you can place any reaction. Really doesn't need to be a question. Can just also be some reaction to the content. Thanks a lot, and thanks for Fred to be with us today, who's going to be moderating the chat. Any question that needs to be answered from a technical point of view, access, he'll handle directly, and maybe questions about slides and stuff like that also. We will circulate the PDF version of all the slides just after the sessions. And I think there will be also a video replay that will be available for everyone afterwards. Okay, so maybe my introduction point in terms of risk, well, it's simply to say that we were not really prepared to what was going to happen. In 2014, we had a survey that went out to a large number of CPO and executive, and 54% of them at that time, they were saying that they were having some high level of involvement of suppliers in risk-related activities. And when we did exactly the same survey in 2018, they had fallen down to 38%. So definitely there was a time with the last crisis and the Euro challenges that there was more attention to the topic of risk management within the procurement community, but little by little, the level of attention has been going down over the years. And it was very interesting. In 2019, we looked at more than 400 companies. We've got data on these 400 companies on 99 questions. And as we run the Peter Krajic Award, we've been able to put on one side what were the results of the winners of the Peter Krajic Award, and on the other side, we put everybody else. And in the top 5, in terms of gap, so where did we have the biggest gap between leaders and followers? One of the points was the risk management. So the leaders, companies very advanced in procurement, kept going with risk management. They were having practices all across the organization implemented, where the other ones were deploying, implementing, and adopting less practice. So I think that's an important point. There was a lack of attention to this topic prior to what happened this year. So now what happened this year and what can we learn about it? So we've been gathering, conducting a lot of interviews, running some surveys between the months of March, April, May, June, July, and number of things. Probably for me, the most striking point, not surprising, but it was really, really strong. The companies that invested a lot in terms of establishing relationship with their key suppliers were much faster in order to address situations. Their tier 1 supplier were really helping them to address a lot of the issues that were coming their way, and they could focus on very specific points. So we saw some organization really, taking care of discussing with the government in Malaysia, for instance, about having the rights to keep some of the factories open over there, because it was difficult for their tier 1 to go there and ask for these type of interventions and get a gain on this one. So they were able really to focus on some tier 3, tier 4 suppliers, and they were able really to, benefit from the relationship they had with their top suppliers in terms of addressing a lot of the risk that were coming their way. Many companies had been investing in business continuity plans in a systematic and structured way. They had scenarios for different situations. They were able to activate some of these scenarios. And again, this is something that has been paying in terms of being rapidly ready, addressing some of the immediate issues and risk in order to ensure continuity, and then focus attention on more important points. Another element has been the ability to leverage multiple sources of information. And I think what was really striking was, yes, there's been some interesting development in terms of accessing data sets that would help to spot geographic areas where there could be some issues. But probably one of the biggest points that we've been hearing is the benefit of having local contact close to the suppliers with good relationship locally that were able to inform, keep the flows of early warning signals coming toward the organization. And I think that's important. To a certain point, data can help centralized organization to address some of the issues taking place quite far and quite deep in their value chain. But relationship at local level have also showed a lot of value in the current context. The other element that really helped to address risk in the spring 2020 was the ability for some purchasing organization to very quickly rebalance priorities. And some of them have been very systematic in terms of who was really focusing on. So some people were dedicated to look at short-term issues, others were put on more long-term type of project. On the short-term issues, some of them were really focusing on maybe the closer supplier, others were looking into a bit further into the value chain. Some of them were working on scenarios for tomorrow. So I think that was absolutely important. I'm hearing sometimes in some organization, it felt a bit cacophonic and it felt a bit disorganized, but we've seen some organizations that were very structured, organized in terms of reassigning people to specific mission at a certain moment of time. And of course, there's sometimes a sense of, we've been able to achieve so much in that period. I think one of the clear reasons was about the cross-functional capabilities, the collective adjustments that were possible to implement together with people from R&D who helped to qualify new sources, to modify some product in order to be able to find alternatives in other places. So these are, I think, important lessons. It's a lot about relationship. It's a lot about the organization ability to assign priorities and work on these in a cross-functional way. This brought me to a book I've read many years ago, and I thought it was interesting to go back to this thing that have been studied quite some time ago. This is the book, and you've got the title here by Weik and Sutcliffe about managing the unexpected, and it's all about resilient performance in the age of uncertainty. It was really interesting because this was a group of researchers in the US, and there was a lot of research done in the 80s, 90s, beginning of years 2000 on what they call highly reliable organization. So this was looking at military, firefighters, nuclear power plants, some extreme healthcare situation. And really trying to understand these organizations that can be under highly turbulent environment, very high pressure, and who have high standards in terms of reliability. What were the practice they were implementing, and how they were managing to cope with that level of turbulence and uncertainty. So they identified, two dimensions, not too surprising. One of them is anticipation, the ability to spot and discover what can go wrong, unexpected events. And the other one was to manage and to react when there were some of these unexpected events. A number of characteristics is first the preoccupation with failure. In highly reliable organization, people don't get satisfied easily with a quick answer or, well, maybe we'll see how this goes. People are not tricked by success, by the feel that, oh, it works well, so let's keep going. People pay attention to weak signals. People pay attention to a failure, to any kind of symptoms of malfunctioning. And this immediately leads to discussions and exchange amongst the people on some even small deviations. So that's really an important aspect, this preoccupation with failure, being focused on identifying some of these weak signals. The reluctance to simplify. In many situations, we might be tempted, to do what's absolutely essential from a Pareto logic, implement something. We know this is going to address 70% of the situation. We believe this should fit, but it's important to, simplify our approach. Sometimes, some of the logic in terms of sourcing, how many suppliers we bring on board, are aimed at simplifying things. We need to be careful to that. Oversimplification is very often a source of risk for tomorrow, issues and troubles. So any kind of strategy, in any kind of decisions together with suppliers, I think it's important to understand when does it make sense to further simplify, because there's benefits of doing so, but where we need to be paying attention to not oversimplifying and exposing at some point the organization to some trouble. The third dimension was really the sensitivity to operation. So the message in terms of high reliability organization is pay attention to what people on the front line are saying. It's very difficult to become a highly reliable organization if you're isolated in an ivory tower at a corporate level and you don't systematically pay attention to what people who are close to the issues, we are close to the front lines, are saying and communicating. And I think this was really something visible during the COVID time. There was this balance between the central and the local, and this continuous flow of information. This is important for both anticipation. So we listen to the people that are bringing some of the trouble that might be materializing into the future, but also it's important to contain. Being close to the people that are seeing and touching closely the problem is absolutely key during that aspect. The commitment to resilience is there's a number of dimensions that I can strictly bring into this, but there's really this ability to develop and implement as needed worst case scenarios. So that means being able to do some stress tests, being able to do to have plans that are going to be actionated whenever there is a worst case scenario. And here, the speed of implementation and the ability to, put this in place is absolutely essential. Also, the one very important aspect in terms of commitment to resilience is to avoid quick interpretation. There's a signal and we react. Our reptilian brain is very, good at interpreting a signal in a certain way. And very often these interpretation can be slightly misleading. So we think fast, but somehow we don't think right. We don't pay enough time. And the last element that's absolutely essential is the deference to expertise. In highly reliable organization, there's really an attention to listening to the people that have the best knowledge, the expertise. There's no blame game going on. It's really about being close to the front line and to the issues. And yeah, I see the point about this 80-20 and this reluctance to simplify. I think it's always a balance. Sometimes we are just pushing a little bit too far the issue of simplification, and sometimes maybe we don't do enough of it. It's also all the balance. It's very good to eliminate what is complicated and what is useless in terms of complication, but when there are complexities, we need to tackle and address it, and we need to have the right way to make this work. Yes. So I thought it was interesting. Highly Reliable Organization. That's a good book. You can find some summaries on the internet. But I think the key message is what you've got on top, is awareness, attention to details. That's something absolutely essential. There was also the former CEO of Intel. He wrote a book saying only the paranoid survive. So this is really this kind of mindset that sounds okay is not good enough. If there's something that's in the back of your head, make you think, maybe it's not just a good news. Maybe there's something not so encouraging behind a signal we're getting from outside. We should pay attention to it. We should have conversation about it. We should pay a phone call. So I think that's a matter of behavior very often, and we need to recover these behaviors. So risk management. So I'm just going to do a little bit of setup, but trying to bring some of the not to do a lot of theory on the topic, but really trying to take you into a little bit on some of the current challenge. So risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So that's really the point. This is managing risk is about making sure that we can address anything that can impact the objectives, the goals of the organization. And one thing that I think is absolutely important here is we're not just talking about the purchasing objectives. We're really talking about the business objectives. And this is something you often see. We did a bit more years ago, 2014, I dig back into the research we did on risk management at that time. They were like something like 60% of the purchasing organization. They were purely looking at dependency risk and financial risk. The rest wasn't really taken into account. There was only something like 10-50% who were really looking at a much broader picture. And I think that's a very important point today, is really to address what is your risk framework, what type of risk you want to look at. So very quickly, we're thinking of the financial risk, being in a situation where a supplier might be going bankrupt, or being too dependent on a supplier, being too dependent on some locations, and then being in a situation where if something goes wrong there, then this could have some disastrous impact on the organization. Over the years, there's been attention on sustainability risk for sure, but there's a broader set of risks that should be integrated into the picture. Quality risk, supply chain risk for delivery, and certainly other risks, that we need to take into account. So that would be the first point. I think we need to make conscious decisions. We need to make conscious decisions about what type of risk we are going to look at across all categories that we have, all segments in terms of purchasing. And also, from time to time, consider at the level of a segment, what are the specific risks we need to take into consideration for specific segments, purchase, or even suppliers sometimes. So that's a very important decision that needs to be made in terms of what is the scope, where do we see ourselves being accountable. And the second one is really to have a very simple reflex of asking oneself what kind of data we have. Too often I see people jumping into, let's go and do some assessment of risk. Let's put people around the table and have some discussion. But, quality risk, we already have quite a lot of, if you're in a company who's supported by manufacturing from supplier, we have a lot of information. We're sitting on data that can help us with this. So what is it that we can already dig from existing data sets, from existing performance measure that we can use as alert system, as a source of information, so we can prioritize attention, for instance. So I think that would be my second point is let's take the time to dig into the data, dig into the information we already have that help us to understand where is it that we can implement some signals. In some very large companies, I think they've been making some of these investments, but I still see a lot of companies who don't have this clarity in terms of overall frameworks and in terms of what would be some of the indicators that could be contributing to understand some of these elements. Then there's really, in terms of characterizing risk, we got into some very strong habits. And the very strong habit is to understand the likelihood and the impact of risk. So whether we take a country, whether we take a category, a segment, whether sometime we look at a supplier, the traditional approach we have to understand risk is to look at, okay, let's list some of the risk we could be facing and how likely they are to happen. And in some organization, it's like, wet figure assessment between 1 and 5. And same on the impact, kind of let's assess things from, 1 to 5. And then depending of where things are positioned on the heat map, well, there will be some specific implementation plan. If something is not likely to happen, but can have a severe impact, then this will be crisis management that will be in place. So we need to have scenarios that can help to address this situation. If this is very likely to happen, this is typically where we need to implement mitigation, redundancy, because we need to tackle this issue of high likelihood on the risk side. And then, there's a big belly in the middle where you need to see what's possible to do. One of the challenges here, as mentioned, is how do you get to this positioning? Very often it's like, I see people pushing the post-it. Oh no, this one is more important than this one, I think like that, or this 1 to 5. I think it's really important to try to be more systematic and structured and getting some scale. Some companies, for instance, they really have done some structured like leveling here. So, between that point and that point, you need to have this kind of a financial impact or this kind of impact in terms of performance, delivery, things like this. And likelihood, it would be something that would be happening, once in a month, once in a year, once in 5 years. So, you can improve on this, and there's certainly, but the one thing that's usually not really seen is detectability and speed of reaction. And that's as important as likelihood and impact. Okay? If something is likely, but we don't see it happen because we can't see it happen, then we're in trouble. Whether, much more in trouble than in very quickly, we're going to see it happen. So our ability to detect, to see some of the issues coming is also essential. And our ability to quickly react to them is also essential. Let me show you 2 cases. So there's here company. So here you have the impact. So how much money, how much cost has been put as risk because of a disruption in a supply chain. And let's say this was a fire in a factory, And one company, company A, the supplier has called them very fast. They discovered the situation very fast, much faster than company B. And that's reality. You know, if there's trouble in the place, supplier, if they inform their client, some of them will be informed first, some of them will be informed last. And then how fast are you to respond to the situation? Some companies will be quick to send a team to, invest in getting into rapid negotiation or where we can find some alternatives in terms of requalifying a source, in terms of, implementing solutions. Other companies will take longer to do this. And basically, if it was longer to discover, maybe some of the alternatives will be harder to get access to. So what you see here, when you pile up the time it takes to discover, the time it takes to recover, here company A was quite fast on both. And then the impact was contained. They were quickly able, to curb some of the issues related to this. While company B, it took them quite some time to discover the problem. And then, emails were circulating around the organization. Should we do something? Should we send people? Who should react to? Maybe someone from the business should pay attention to this. Nobody's reacting, and it takes 4 weeks before something is really done. And then, you could have this kind of exponential impact. So here, when we measure the impact, we measure the impact based on a certain assumption of what will be our ability to discover and what will be our ability to react, our speed of reaction. But what we see here is there will be a lot of differences. So that's really my first point. In many organizations, there's a sort of people love these metrics and we do these metrics, and because we do these metrics in terms of likelihood impact, this means we've done the job in terms of risk management. But here, just detectability and speed of reaction might not even be into the picture here. Maybe into the actions in terms of monitoring, paying attention. There will be something done here to try to improve the detectability. But I think that's an important element that's not fully taken in consideration here. So it takes a little bit more than applying the tools. I'm going to take you now through a big exercise. So we brought together a number of former CPOs, existing CPOs. So this has been developed together by myself, the former CPO of electronics company, Texas Instruments, of Sanofi, and former CPO of a number of companies in the steel industry. And we try to understand, we started from the point of view of, we know what are the good practices to implement risk management. That has been studied for many, many years. There's a lot of books and knowledge that can really help us to understand what works from a risk management point of view, but we keep failing. We keep, having some holes and not being able to deliver as much as we should. So why? So we identified 4 sources, some linked to the method we use, some associated with a lack of collaboration, and some associated with management problems, and some due to a lack of fact-based decision making. So on the method side, I think we have a lot of cognitive bias. So we have a lot of situations where we are going to interpret things because our brain is tricking us. So there's a situation of overconfidence. If things are going well for the past a year and a half, if we never saw an issue on something, then our brain is going to ignore some of the issue that we see coming up. Some of the risk that might have a low probability but high impact, or when there's cultural differences, there might be a total lack of attention to them. We might not just pay attention to these ones. We might not discuss them because of their peculiarities. And there are risks that we might be talking a lot. I mean, maybe the volcano ashes has created a special attentions to volcanoes and things like that, and some of these elements. So our brain is being conditioned to look at some risk and not at other risk. And I also see sometimes, people coming up with a risk matrix and just saying, well, all that. There's a sort of paralysis. Yes, we can identify things, but this is depressing. And well, at the end of the day, I prefer to work on something else and not pay too much attention to that. Some risk, they lack visibility. And we all know that, tier 2 suppliers, tier 3 suppliers, really difficult to get some information on this one. But some risks are also very difficult to spot. And maybe there will never be any kind of data that will help us to understand it. So during the COVID period, for instance, some factories in Asia, they were relying on workers coming from other countries, migrants, and extensively. And these people went back, they left. They went back to their family, they went back to their country. And some of these factories were, having difficulties to restart simply because of labor shortages. You didn't have anyone to run some factories. That's very difficult to get information on these types of risk, for instance. And there will always be risk that will be really difficult to assess, understand, get an idea on how much time it's going to take to recover from them. So these are important ones because they might be hard to detect and they might be hard to handle because data is really lacking, information is lacking, or information is not really helping to make progress on that. Some poor analysis. One of the things when we position this is we always look at all the risk on the matrix, likelihood and impact. We always consider risk independently of each other. And we all know, the Murphy's Law. When something goes wrong, everybody goes wrong. Well, basically, it's because these risks are interconnected. One of the supplier who's getting into financial trouble is also going to have quality problems and end up having issues in terms of delivery. These risks are now independent of each other. What happened here is a series of consequences and causes that are interconnected when we tend to look at these things in different way. So we need to pay attention also to that. Very often we have this kind of 1 to 5 evaluation. And very rarely we do a real value at risk analysis. So value at risk analysis is a systematic process to put some assumptions and some money in front of the decision. So what would be the real impact in terms of financial impact, and what would be the cost of putting in place some countermeasure, and what would be the final equation of things? Of course, because of many things I've said before, some of these calculations are going to be approximative. That's why we want to look at assumptions and look within these assumptions what kind of impact and what kind of implication of the solution. But at least this is forcing us to pay more attention, to look deeper into some of the aspects that we have here. And one of the challenge in terms of analysis is the lack of contradictory debates. I mean, to be honest, I think a lot of the risk analysis are done by individuals alone when they do their category strategy, where they prepare a review, they prepare a backup slide, and they just put a few risks on the paper and a few things. Maybe they show it to a few people, get a quick reaction. Well, that might not be enough in terms of having these contradictory debates, discussion to try to really understand what is at stake. So that's from a method point of view. There's already a lot of things that can be done here. We also have issues in terms of collaboration internally. Okay, there's a bit this syndrome of there's a purchasing risk, there's a financial risk, there's the R&D risk, there's the operation risk. Most of the risk, especially coming from supplier side, they're going to impact the full organization. And it's absolutely important to be able to look beyond functions and not simply look where it's easy to find something. Yes, of course, looking for dependencies is easy for us to find them. So we look under the light, we look where there is, we look on the first page of Google when we look for a search. We're not really looking in the darkness where some of the wrong things can be preparing for tomorrow. And then, so many times I've been exchanging with some of my, students working in companies who tell me, well, I've been telling people, I've seen this happening in the supply chain. I've been, passing the information back to this person and that person, but people don't listen. People don't want to hear the bad news. So who sees the risk? Who owns the actions is very different, and that's one of the challenge. Maybe sometime we need to get the product owner to do something in order to help tackle this kind of situation. But if we don't have this internal collaboration, it doesn't work. The other one is lack of industry collaboration. There are a lot of benefits, and we've seen that in some industry for sustainability. In the chemical environment, in the cosmetic world industry, they've decided to, work together and mutualize some of the audits and assessment that are being done. And for risk management, there would be a lot of benefit of doing this as well. Not just having, so many companies that are part of the same value chain, taking the leadership in doing what is right for themselves, but pooling resources to do things together. But that's not easy. I've seen companies trying to ask their supplier to provide GPS coordinates of their tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, and some suppliers refusing to pass that information. There's been some companies that have been pushing to use some common information systems in order to map some risk, but there was a battle of system. One company like that one, the other company like this other provider, and then they never ended up implementing something. And sometimes you need to get the agreement of the client in order to do some, or a regulator to do some requalification. So a lack of collaboration within an industry is preventing to mutualize some learning that could really do a lot of good here. I don't know how to tackle that one. That's a big challenge. Lack of collaboration also with some supplier. Why? Because sometimes it's just easy to push the risk on them. It's just easy, to whenever we've got a cash issue to, tell the supplier is going to take the risk in terms of a cash. So that's just a risk. That's how you end up with some horse meat in your lasagna. It's because we've been pushing risk to the smaller player, the weaker player in the chain. So it's absolutely essential. If we're not treated as a preferred client by our supplier, it means like we're naked. We don't have an insurance. We have nothing that's going to help us. And we need to share information. Very often, we establish these SRM programs, we identify all the suppliers we should have in our top tier, and we're happy to give them some news, some information about the strategy, about all this. But are we really passing information when trouble is coming? Yeah, during COVID period, when trouble was there and raging all around, we were talking with them. But normally, are we passing bad news? Are we sharing bad news? Do we create a climate, a proximity at the right level with people that allow this information to circulate? Well, not often, not enough. So if we don't have these human connections, if we don't have that trust, that's really getting people to say, I need to call them, I need to pass a message, I have a contact in that company that is not going to blame me, but is going to be listening and looking at what they can do on their side, then we're not a preferred client and we won't be helped in managing risk. More, I know, it's more. Poor governance. Uh, there's often a poor positioning of risk from a hierarchical point of view. It's so nice just to keep things below uh, at the basic level, because if we leave too much to escalate, we're going to get too much on our plate. So we need to treat risk at the right level from a hierarchical point of view and be reactive enough. In the stories of this kind of exponential impact, well, it's often higher level of the organization that don't want to take accountability, allow time in their agenda to discuss some of these issues, and this is being pushed from one week to another. But this could be crucial time. The governance for the risk. Some companies, they've established enterprise risk management. They've started from the top, defined at the level of the full corporation what needs to be reported to the board, and then they start to look at the level of countries and the level of functions, what needs to be addressed. So they've established from the top some of this governance. But others, they don't have this enterprise risk framework, and it's a little bit more from here and there, grassroots initiative to define the governance from the bottom, and that creates a little bit of challenge. The culture is not supportive. It's very rare that someone has been recognized, publicly acknowledged as someone who did a great job for bringing some bad news in many situations. We don't have enough of the discussions about early warning signals. We don't see risk as a value creation activity when it is. If your company is much better at handling risk, this is a benefit they bring to their final client. And I've seen cases of that in some industries where some purchasing organization have told me, this supplier, they might be more expensive, but when there was, the big issue in Thailand with the flood, they were so good to help us handle the situation. And that year, we didn't lose any revenue. We didn't incur massive extra cost thanks to them. So we still give them positive point in any RFP. Well, this is having an impact on the revenue and the value creation. So the culture is not helping to promote, good behavior in this field. Implementation of solution can be poor. When you need something to be done, you need a budget, you need people, you need people being appointed as project manager. When I was working in the automotive industry, if there was a technical modification to be made on an existing vehicle, and this was quite often a long loop of work, and you needed to handle all the change of in the inventories because there was a product change. I was not very glamorous in terms of job, and therefore it was really important to make sure the governance was very clear on what needed to be done and what could be postponed. But if some jobs don't feel very attractive from that point of view, if it's difficult to get the resources and the people to tackle some of the risks that we've identified, then we're in trouble. Lack of measurement. So yeah, there's still, and I don't understand that. There's still there's still a tendency to see risk management as an exercise where we are going to, put post-its and human beings are going to put things on the table. When there's lots of data we have that can help us to map. A few years ago, I had an executive MBA student from Grundfos that has been doing a project. He identified through workshop with suppliers, through workshop with other purchasing managers, through internal workshops. He identified overall something like 15, 20 risks that they wanted to pay attention to. And for these, all of these, he was able to quickly find within their unique SAP system that was helping. He was able to find probably like, for three quarter of them, internal data that could be used as an indicator, telling us if there was attention needed to be paid. And he was also able for some others to get external data pretty easy to access that could be put into the system. And he created a dashboard. And the dashboard was automatically for each component supply showing the level of risk and where that risk was coming from. And then the beauty of it was he was also able to give to the product owner, so the head of a business unit or the person accountable to oversee a product, which product were the most at risk and a good understanding of where this was coming from. And there were things that were not linked to the supplier, but linked to the organization. So when they were like, the quality of the planning was considered as one of the risk here, for instance. So this was really a good way of giving everyone some measurement that really helped to see where they should be paying attention, at least. And we don't have, always risk being part of goals, ambitions in an organization. Poor validation of risk, very often we have kind of a assessment, but we don't measure the value of risk. We don't look at the full TCO impact of some risk. And then we don't look at multiple risk playing games together that can be really tricky, and this more holistic approach and stress test that can be implemented. So a lot of reasons why often the risk management is not leading really to the expected benefits. So together with my group of CPO, and after we discussed that with another group of, this was discussed afterward with 15 CPOs in a session online. So we came up with some principles. We need solid accountabilities related to risk, governance roles, clear accountabilities that focus more on anticipation than, reacting afterward. Collective intelligence, really making sure that there is time given to identify some of the early warning signals, that we have time dedicated to have the right dialogues together with the suppliers, together with people from the other functions, setting some rituals, setting some, recurring things. Simple thing that was done in some companies in the food, milk related industry and packaging, for instance. There were the CPO that used to have a regular meeting where all of the segments would be bringing some of the early warning signals, new type of thing they've seen in the market coming up, and everybody would join in an online meeting and could share. This was also people from the stakeholders invited to this. So that was a way of telling everyone that he was listening on a continuous basis. He was paying attention to this early warning signal. People felt like, oh, I need to pay attention. I need to come with something. And at some point, this lead to doing the right thing in terms of really paying attention and really bringing useful early warning signals. So that's what I mean by a ritual, a way of, creating something that comes on a regular basis and that puts in the head of everyone what's important. Very often we say, hey, let's do a few training or one session, post something on the intranet. That doesn't work. That doesn't change a culture. What changes a culture is heroes and rituals. So recognizing people for outstanding things they've done and creating this kind of recurring event where attention is given to something in a positive way. And education for people, for stakeholders, for suppliers as well. I think it's important to get everybody on, the right understanding in terms of what's important. Improve visibility. So I think there's a balance to be found by digital solutions versus relationship management skills. So, and even in digital solutions, you've got some sources of data that you can embed in your system that you can use on a regular basis. But I think it's also good to have some capabilities to, have some people that can program in Python, not very far away from the procurement organization or inside, and then quickly they can get access to external data that's being published on a pandemic or anything else, and plug that into your own systems in terms of being able to alert in terms of geographies. If you have data about your supplier GPS location, if you have data about some tier 2 supplier locations, then some companies have been able to get the information about the pandemic and highlight automatically where they should be paying next attention to. But relationship is essential. Using internal, external network to get insight on risk. We need to reach out, we need to talk to people, we need to have people in the field, close to the issues, the deference to the expert. That's absolutely essential, and that I've mentioned before. And really this work of, data is useless as long as we've not transformed that into intelligence. And we need to have meetings for this. We need to have conversations. Informed conversation between people who pay attention and look at the data from different angles and end up with decisions that are going to be implemented because of the accountabilities. Agility, we need to have robust process, but we also need to be proactive and put some resource somewhere in order to anticipate and look into something, take them out of some other activities if needed, and tell them we need to look at that quickly. Also, see the positive impact and opportunities. There's been a lot of opportunities that have been coming up during the period as well. Maybe some of your suppliers were focusing on a certain industry, that industry went down. So maybe it was like a supplier that wasn't paying attention a lot to you. Have you really been taking advantage of that? Creating stronger links, making yourself more attractive, so you're getting better risk management, better cost, price, better innovation, I don't know. And really finding this kind of way of addressing things locally, centrally, having a way of passing information in a structured manner from the central and the local. So that's some of the principle. You will get this little kind of 12 questions that we've prepared in order to kind of, ask the right questions that's still associated with the document we've seen before. Do you have formal risk process? Do you have a risk profile for produce at the procurement level on a regular basis? Some of the companies I've seen now, they update it every month minimum. So they come up with, for the whole procurement and from some of the from the segment, they update their risk matrix on a monthly basis. Also, you have systematically a risk chapter in your sourcing strategies. Are you looking also at what happened to competitors? Very often that's a good source of information. That's really, really looking at the press, getting a few robots to, it's just a Google alert actually in Google News, any kind of, term of risk and linking that to any of the big name of your supplier. It's usually very interesting to look at what has been happening. If you look in your industry and the top 5, 6 players and what has been said in the press, that's always very useful to look at. Are there any system digital solution for tracking, managing risk you can recommend or you can have experience with? So there's different aspects here. So yeah, I wouldn't give any name. That's not our job to recommend a specific name. But there's two things. I think there are companies that are going to offer you some services in terms of assessment, compilation of data, and that after you're going to have to integrate in your information architecture. And that's the other aspect. I think the companies that are moving forward are the companies that are investing in business intelligence tools. So business intelligence tools, they allow, massive amount of data to come from different parts of the organization to go into a sort of a common repository. And from this, it's possible to start to, perform further analysis, develop some use case to be able to have more integrated monitoring of things. So that's the thing. So maybe having some people that are able to quickly program some bridges between public information and your systems is or also an important aspect. Having potentially, let's talk sustainability. You have an organization like EcoVadis who are offering a lot of service. They're well known. So this type of organization can provide some input here. And after, I think the whole important thing is how this is going to be handled and treated inside the company. And that's not just by having a risk management solution. This is your broader data management tools. So you can just look for, so when we say business intelligence, it's not about market intelligence. It's really like all these systems. Well, maybe the best known, I'm not recommending anything, but Power BI from Microsoft is one of these tools that allow you to, grab data from many sources inside the company, put everything together into a platform where you can then do some data visualization, apply some machine learning algorithm, and come up with some new dashboard and things like that. But there's also already a lot if you're able to build on your ERP system. That can be done in terms of combining different sources of information. If you look at everything's related to quality, everything's related to supply chain, well, a lot of the data can be already into your ERP system. So it's a mix. It's a mix between, new providers who come up with some data, a mix of being able to quickly design a little tool that help to visualize some of the coming things and using some of the more fundamental investment in terms of data across the organization. My last point really is just to say that investing in this, I think, we need to have that in mind. Is of course to keep corporate investment safe. We want our company to continue to strive and to perform, but it's also contributing to societal resilience because making sure that and I think our supply chain have been resisting very well. Maybe we don't say that enough. We've just been talking about trouble and issues, but the first point, I mean, okay, in some sectors, the volumes have been going down, but I've seen sectors where volumes and sales have been going up, and a lot of supply chain, people have been fearing issues, catastrophes. They've been working a lot, but the value chain and supply chain have been resisting very well. So I think in the future, there'll be more factors that will make things even more dangerous. but it's important for the company we work for, but also contributing to a broader societal resilience and contributing to prevent the effect of the pandemic to affect the life of so many people. So there's a purpose behind that. There's a broader contribution, and this all should motivate us to further pay attention, become some positive paranoid, having the right conversation, creating the right rituals, putting the right governance in place, implementing the right tools across the organization, but taking actions. That's the big point. It's not just seeing what's going to come, but acting, getting involved with supplier, getting involved with the business in order to address some of the things that are coming. That's it. I've been talking a lot already. I've been answering a few questions as they were popping up. I don't know if I've missed any of these. I hope it has been useful to you, trying to give a broad perspective, not just on what works. I'm not here to sell any tool. I'm not here to promote any practice, but trying to take a more holistic approach, trying to provide a few, recommendation in terms of what we need to pay attention to if we want to move forward with risk management. Thanks a lot for the time. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and we're going to be having a new session this afternoon. So, if you want to recommend to some of your colleagues, I think we still have a few spots available. Don't hesitate, and send me a message if you've done something outstanding, something going in the directions of solving some of the problems, or if you just want to exchange a few views. I'm always curious to listen to people on the forefront dealing with the challenge. So thanks again, and all the best. Keep safe in the months to come, and looking forward to see you in other circumstances for some exchange on best practice related to digital innovation, risk management, and many other topics that will be coming to the future. Bye-bye.